Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Vikram Khosa, and I will be introducing Dr. Kak, who's presenting today's talk. And it's a long. I mean, I was going through Dr. Kak's bio and trying to do my research, and there's literally so much. So I'm going to try to keep it short, but it will still it's quite a bit. So just in my view, Professor Kak fits the description of a Renaissance man as best as anyone can in today's world of sort of specializations and whatnot. He's currently Regents Professor of Computer Science at Oklahoma State University. He was born in Srinagar, Kashmir. He earned his PhD in electrical engineering from IIT Delhi. During most of his career, he served as a distinguished professor at the Louisiana State University in Baton Rouge. Professor Kak's scientific research has spanned the fields of information theory, cryptography, and neural networks, where he's done some pioneering work. But Professor Kak is equally renowned as an archaeoastronomer and a prolific Vedic scholar. Over the last several decades, he has done some groundbreaking research into the astronomy of ancient India, as well as Indic metaphysics, mathematics, linguistics, and literature. Along the way, he's proposed some very original theories, some of which have created quite a stir in mainstream academic circles, which is still arguably dominated by a more sort of Eurocentric worldview. He has authored at least a dozen books, maybe more. I think we're going to talk about one of your new books, perhaps, on a variety of topics, including the history and philosophy of science and the history of mathematics. He's also an accomplished poet and has published 6 books of verse. Professor Kak has also been duly recognized for his contributions and continues to be celebrated in multiple spheres. Obviously, you're very active on social media as well, with podcasts, etc. In 2019, he was awarded the Padma Shri by the government of India. Just to kind of summarize, in my view, Professor Kak has been a leading figure in the movement to kind of rediscover and revitalize long-lost aspects of our civilization, not merely to just kind of recall our past glories, but more importantly, serve to reimagine the future of not just India, but the entire world. So that's kind of the intro. I'm not sure, Dr. Kak, did that do justice or?
Thanks. Yeah, no, thank you, Vikram. Very, very kind intro. Appreciate it. Now, Anjana ji had told me to speak on yoga. And that seemed to be a kind of a surprising choice for the topic, as she told me first, because one doesn't associate yoga with Kashmir. But one of the chapters in my new book, which I believe is just out in India, called Whispers from the Past, Art and Wisdom of Kashmir, there's a chapter on yoga, on Patanjali. Now, anybody who does yoga, young or old, the 2 greatest texts to go to for guidance are either the Yoga Sutras, right? Patanjali's Yoga Sutra with 4 parts, where the very first sutra is Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Yoga is stopping of the fluctuations of the mind. That's what the very first sutra is. So you either go to Patanjali or you go to the Bhagavad Gita, the other great, great book. That is, Krishna is also called Yogeshwar, for example. In fact, the Panchang, or the annual almanac that we used to get in Kashmir was called Yogeshwar Jantri, right? If you remember. Yogeshwar Jantri, with Krishna's picture on the top. So Krishna is the great yogi, and the Bhagavad Gita is all about doing different kinds of yoga, such as Gyan Yoga or Raja Yoga or Karma Yoga, and so on. So now, certainly Krishna is not a Kashmiri, is not associated with Kashmir, although, his influence is pan-Indic. But Patanjali surprisingly is, although it's not widely known. And I think that's a very, very interesting piece of information. And to know, now you might ask me, hey, how does Subhash Kak, how did I get into all of this? I'll just make it a bit more interesting. I grew up in very small villages in Kashmir. My first school, well, my very first school was in Jammu, not in Jammu town, but in a place called Basoli. It's a small town. From there, I went to Udhampur when I was still in primary school. From there, went to Kulgam for 2 years. Small town. Kulgam to Baramulla or Varamul for 1 year, to Ladakh for 2 years, and then to Anantnag for 3, 4 years until I did my school. So our schools were so bad. And perhaps excluding Leh. Leh wasn't that bad. I still remember the principal. He was a local Christian named E. Jolden, Jolden, with a very fine presence. So I think that was the best of these schools. So these schools were so bad that I was left alone to myself. And that's how, I read up on anything that I could lay my hands on. And that's how I got into even, Sanskrit stuff. And my father, who had been, and he was also born in Srinagar. I was born in Srinagar too. So my father was orphaned. He lost his mother when he was only 6 months old to the great influenza pandemic. So then he was raised by his aunts and uncles. And then his father, that's my grandfather, was in the police. And when my father was still in the primary school, my grandfather was sent to a mission to nab some bad people in Pahalgam or somewhere, and he was killed. So then my father was really an orphan. And then he was raised by his older brother, who was a lecturer or a college professor in Punjab. And so my father grew up in this more cosmopolitan culture background of Hindi literature, perhaps, and Kashmiri and Sanskrit, probably because of his personal tragic experience. He also wanted to connect to Sanskrit and so on, which is why maybe my upbringing was sort of unusual from most others. And since we are going from one town to another, we didn't have that much of interconnection with family, with the extended family. Although we would go from time to time, not very frequently, to Sathu Barbar, which is where my dad's uncle and aunt, who were his adoptive parents after his parents died, lived. So we also had an anchor, Upper Sathu Barbar. So run up and down the gullies of Sathu Barbar. I've done a tremendous amount of that. So in any event, so I was connected to literature and knowledge, not through formal schooling, which is how most people do it. They go to school and you are prescribed certain books, English literature or Shakespeare or the Brownings or Austen or whatever else, or Greek. So I had an empty slate. So I had in Anantnag there was this small library which had books on Greek or Latin or European and Russian literature. So I sort of did all of that, including Sanskrit stuff. And so it probably gave me a perspective which, due to the accident of how I grew up, turned out to be different. So I grew up not with this negativity, which is pushed down about India's past in Indian school books, right? In school or college. Because here, that's not how I had seen India, or that's not how I had seen Kashmir, or that's not how I had seen life across different communities in small villages, totally counter to what one reads. And therefore, maybe I've been unafraid. If you say, hey, why is Subhash Kak so foolhardy to try to get into subjects that are not his academic specialty? That's because, well, at some point I said, if there's something that I see and it makes sense, well, and if I have something to say, I'm going to say it. And I'm going to say it sensibly, in a way that others can relate to. And if you make a good case, it will be published because there are enough good people all across the world. So, with this as background, a long time ago, I translated Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, etc. And then you come across in the Sanskrit literature that according to the Indian tradition, there was only one Patanjali, although there are three famous areas which are associated with the name of Patanjali. One is grammar. The greatest uh, grammar in the whole world is Panini's Ashtadhyayi, which is about 500 BCE. But Ashtadhyayi really became famous because of a Patanjali who wrote a commentary on it called Mahabhashya, or the Great Commentary, in 150 BCE. Okay, and this is a huge commentary. He takes the rules that Panini gives in his grammar, and Panini's grammar is 4,000 algebraic rules, like formulas, which is like a computer program. These rules have rules plus rules about rules. It's incredible. So in computer science, they say that, Panini is really the originator of algorithmic thinking all over the world. Okay, but that we don't want to talk about that today. So Patanjali, in his great commentary, which you can access on the internet as well, in translation as well as original Sanskrit, speaks of villages and towns and places. He shows complete familiarity with Kashmir. That's the only geography. So Patanjali is Kashmiri. So he's one of the greatest sages of Sanskrit language, plus yoga. Really, everybody, even Westerners, if they want to do yoga at some point, they go to the Yoga Sutras. Now, that's one. There's another Patanjali who did Ayurveda. Now, the Ayurvedic tradition is also connected with Kashmir in a very fundamental way, because there are two samhitas, the big compendiums of Ayurveda. One is called Charak, the other is Sushrut. And the Charak Samhita is related to the Atharva Ved tradition, which was very popular in Kashmir. So Charaks were Kashmiris, and one of the Charaks, now this is a kind of a title, Charak is a traveler, somebody who's moving. Physicians were travelers, so they were called Charaks, right? So one of the Charaks did the final editing of the Charak Samhita. And he was a Kashmiri because he also mentions Kashmir. So, okay, so one is Ayurveda, the other is grammar, and the third is Yoga Sutra itself. Now, the reason why in the popular imagination, people think that Patanjali of the Yoga Sutra might be from the south, because South India, that is, because there are temples to Patanjali in South India. But then when you do research, you discover that for some time, even in East India, people thought that Patanjali was from the Gaud Desh. Gaud means the eastern parts of the country. And they say, now scholars believe that could be a misunderstanding, because if you read Kalhan's Raj Tarangani, one of the mythical kings that he speaks about is called Gonanda, the Gonanda dynasty. So this Gonanda was transcribed wrongly as Gonarda, which which people thought was probably a indication of Gaud. So they thought he was from India, from East India. But then Patanjali's fame was so huge that even people in Thailand say that really he's from Thailand. But really now, how do we resolve all this? The Sanskrit commentators, right from very early on, say that there's only one Patanjali. And this Patanjali wrote all these three. And therefore, this Patanjali ought to have been around 150 BCE, because we know that the grammarian Patanjali, since he speaks about a certain sacrifice by Pushya Mitra Shunga, who Shunga dynasty came after the Maurya dynasty. And we know the time of that Pushyamitra Shunga is 150 BCE. And on linguistic grounds as well, the language of Yoga Sutras is about the language of Sanskrit of that time. All languages change somewhat, although Sanskrit is a bit unusual, because after Ashtadhyayi, after the grammar of Panini came along, his prestige was so much that the grammar and the usage of Sanskrit sort of got frozen. But this freezing of Sanskrit, of grammar, is also a useful indicator to see which literature might be prior to Panini. For example, certainly the Vedas don't completely conform to Panini's grammar, so we know that's much prior to Panini. And even Bhagavad Gita has certain usages which don't conform to Panini. So we know that the Bhagavad Gita or that part of the Mahabharata should be prior to Panini. There's a lot of interesting stuff. Now, of course, the whole thing about the lower part of Patanjali shown as a snake, and in iconographic representations of Patanjali, he's shown with a human head and a snake tail. And that is also connected to Kashmir, because in Kashmir, as we go, if you do Nilmat Puran, you find that this tradition of the Nagas, or even that famous folk story of Himal Nagarai, right? She falls in love um, uh, with this underground. The Nagas live underground. This is, of course, Naga is a totem. And then it was all poetically enlarged to say that these Nagas are actually living underground. And therefore, Himal goes underground, etc., etc. But really, it is representative of something very esoteric in yoga, which is that yoga ultimately, and yet again, Kashmir made some fundamental contributions to Tantra. One of the most subtle things in yoga, and you may have seen this image, is that of Sri Vidya. All these triangles, 9 triangles with the boundary, etc., etc., which is also seen in Srinagar, inscribed on a rock at Hari Parbat, right? That's called Chakreshwari or something. I've seen that picture myself, right? So yoga tantra, which is, yoga has 2 aspects. One is, of course, you do meditation or mantra or whatever, the asanas and so on, which is what Yoga Sutras talk about. But then when you take a deeper dive, you're taking a deeper dive into your own self, into your own physiological and its accompanying psychological self, which is all within you, which is where you have all these chakras, right? You have the 5 chakras, and you have the Sahasrara at the top, or the Muladhara chakra, which is the very source of all emotion, of feelings, and so on. And at that chakra is visualized a snake that is Kundalini, meaning coiled, a coiled energy, right? A kind of a snake. It's a serpentine energy. Okay, so it's that more esoteric thing that is connected with Patanjali's human representation in temples in the south, because I'm not sure whether there's any representation in any of the Kashmiri temples, because as we also know, and this is something I personally admire, my own aesthetics is in line with it. The Kashmiri aesthetics of austerity. A Kashmiri temple is very austere, unlike a South Indian temple, with all its vimanas, with hundreds of thousands of murtis and images all around it, right? Of color and so on. Not Kashmiri temple. Kashmiri temple is absolutely austere. And I like that. I like that aesthetics. In fact, that's an aesthetics for those of you interested in my poetry. That's the aesthetics I am guided by in my own writing, and which you also see carried perhaps across the frontiers of Kashmir, all the way through China. Where in China, the dhyan of Yoga Sutras became Chan in Chinese, and then in Japan, it became Zen. And as you know, the Zen aesthetics is a very, very tough aesthetics, just like very austere aesthetic, which takes you to poetic forms such as that of the haiku, right? 17 syllables. You want to express the whole depth of your feeling through those 17 syllables, through images, right? An image and its counter, the paradox, and the resolution of that paradox. So I'll only say this is about 22 minutes. What I had agreed with Angela ji was that we'll speak for 20 minutes. We really don't want it to be a lecture. We just want a conversation. So with this as background, that there is preponderant evidence that yoga, not only the Yoga Sutras, but also its later elaborations uh, through through Tantra. And in fact, the very name Kaul, which many of us possess, my mother was a Kaul too, is this tantric representation. Kashmir Shaivism itself is Tantra. Kashmir Shaivism entirely, which was the traditional Kashmiri religion. Kashmir, if you go back to Nilmat Puran, Kashmir was also worshipped Vishnu and so on. And in fact, in Avanti Varman's time, you go to Uvantpur, Avantipur, you'll see the temple to Vishnu opposite the temple to Shiva and so on. So we also worship Vishnu, but as a Kashmir Shaivite tradition, fundamentally is a tantric tradition. All the Kashmiris were tantrics. That's why they call thing. And the word call really, what it really means is it's from kul, kul meaning family. That here is the whole psyche, the human psyche or mind, mind space held up, so to speak, by all these devatas within you. You have the outer space, which is called Bhautik Akash, for example. There is this one of the great Kashmiri texts. I'm not talking of Katha Sarit Saga, but let's let that pass. So you have the Bhautik Akash, but you also have the Chidakash, Chitta Akash, the Akash of consciousness, and the Akash of the mind. And this Akash of mind is really held up by these independent centers within the mind, and which is rather very advanced. In fact, I even wrote a book on it 20 years ago called The Gods Within, where I tried to correlate these insights with modern neuroscience. Because in modern neuroscience, there is confirmation that these perceptions are sort of independent. And let me just give you one short example on that. A person can get a stroke or have brain injury, after which one can lose the capacity to read. Everything, your eyesight is fine, you can see whatever you want perfectly clearly as before, but you can't recognize letters. You're shown A, B, C, D, E, and you say, yeah, I see A, I see B. But when you're shown those letters again, you cannot recall them. Now, which means that the center in the brain, which does recognition of letters, has been damaged, okay? But now imagine that some of these people can still write. So you can't read, but you can write. If they're not looking at the paper, you can still write, which means that these are independent. And this is called alexia without agraphia. Alexia is when you lose the capacity to read, alexia without agraphia. So all this study of Kashmiri yogic tradition, including Kashmir Shaivism, etc., confirms in our mind it's profoundly scientific in every sense. And if we haven't seen the science of it, is because that's been our shortcoming. We've approached it from the wrong end. We approached it more from the perspective, perhaps, of ritual. Hey, how do we make sense of this ritual? And that's a good question to ask. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be asking questions, but if we approach all this from the right end, it's the most extraordinary thing that there is. And it's most extraordinary, not just for each one of us in our personal journeys of self-understanding, but also to strengthen us in whatever we might be doing in our lives. And so, from this perspective, yoga is a wonderful thing. Yoga from Kashmir and related to Kashmir, and of course, it's all universal. I do not focus or emphasize the fact that Patanjali has a Kashmiri connection, because that's not my objective at all. It's universal knowledge. It's amazing. It's wonderful that we are part of that living tradition. And certainly, I saw that living tradition when I was growing up, because due to the accident of how I was raised, in villages, we would have people drop in. Some of them were very poor, but they are from small villages. And what they talked about was very deep insight about life and the world, accepting that they didn't have access to modern vocabulary that we have, thanks to our college and Western education. So with this, I'll stop, and the rest of the time we can chat about this or any other thoughts that come to your mind.
Yeah, I think with this, I'd like to encourage everyone to, post their questions on the chat window, and then maybe we can pick those up and discuss them one by one. I think I see that Anjan already has a question. I think it says, can Patanjali's teachings on meditation and mental discipline be reconciled with modern scientific understandings of mindfulness?
Oh, of course. Mindfulness is rather pedantic way of looking at what it is. It's the term mindfulness has been made popular by Buddhist teachers in America, and they really don't get all of it. There's been Kashmir was also a great place where the Buddhists and the Vedis or the Shaivites argued with each other. And in fact, another Kashmiri, a half Kashmiri, named Kumarajiv, if you haven't heard of him, in the 3rd century, 250 CE or so, his father was a Kashmiri who goes to Central Asia, marries the princess, and then they have this child, and they come back to Kashmir. The mother and the son come to Kashmir, and he's properly educated there. And finally, he's the guy who gave China the religion that China celebrates, because he translated the Sanskrit text into the Chinese language. But he translated them of these texts in a fashion which gave it really a Vedic angle, which is why Mahayana is so different from Hinayan, as practiced in Sri Lanka or Thailand and so on. So Kashmir played a very, very important role there as well. I have many of these stories in my new book. But okay, mindfulness says that, okay, you're only absorbed, you try to live in the present moment, because the Buddhist view is that there is no reality, there's no absolute reality, and it's mind going through many transformations through life. And this question came up in ancient Kashmir as well, and to which the answer from the Vedic tradition, which I think really makes sense for another reason, which I'll come to in a moment. The answer was that, look, okay, if mind is only transformations in the background of nothing, then how do you connect your experience at the age of 5, if you remember it, or 6 or whatever, to who you are now? Because your body has changed, your memories are all gone or transformed. Each time we remember something, it's already changed, right? So what the Vedic or Vedantic or Shaivite, Kashmir Shaivite tradition says is that behind all the mindfulness is the presence of the unchanging self, or Shiva, if you want to call it, or Prakash, if you want to call it, unchanging light, which holds it all together. And so mindfulness is one step, which is, I'm not saying that one shouldn't be mindful. Certainly, that's one way of preparing oneself. But what Kashmiri yoga, let's not call it Kashmiri, what yoga or the Veda says is that we are talking of something which transcends the mind. And ultimately, you have to go beyond mindfulness, which is where you're still in relationship with your memories, right? Your smritis, your memories, to the very light which shines on these memories. And I should tell you this. 6 months ago, I published a paper which I believe is probably of some true importance, where I was able to prove as a mathematical theorem that consciousness is not material. Consciousness is not a property of matter. Consciousness could not have arisen in the brain. So in other words, I prove as a mathematical theorem the very heart of what Vedanta is, or very heart of what Kashmir Shaivism is. What Kashmir Shaivism or classical Vedanta is, if you read the Bhagavad Gita, that the Atma is not a part of the Sharir, of the body. Atma is transcendent, it's para, right? All the Upanishads speak of that. Or in Kashmir Shaivism, Shiva is beyond Shakti, and Shiva and Shakti, the marriage in Shivaratri, for example, occurs within us because Shiva is within us and we are also Shakti, we are Prakriti, right? So this then, the fact that Atma is transcendent, that consciousness is transcendent, opens up a whole new space which goes beyond mindfulness. But still, mindfulness is a good preparation, if you will, to this amazing space. Amazing space. I'll be happy to share this paper. I posted it today. It's behind the paywall of the journal. The journal is Journal of AI and Consciousness, which is the leading journal in the field. But I posted it on my academia.edu as a print where you can download it for free.
Very interesting. I think Shruti has a question. She says, how does one understand the kernel or core of what is Tantra, and by extension, the non-duality inherent in Kashmiri philosophy, amidst all the noise the rest of the world has created around this term?
See, where we forget and where we get lost in details is that I think each person, every young person should also ask the question of their parent or their teacher, hey, what is special about Kashmir Shaivism? Why are you talking about Kashmir Shaivism? Why aren't we happy with all the science that we get in school or college, right? And that's a very valid question to ask. For example, as a child, I would refuse to go to the mandirs inside. I would say, why do I have to go? And why do I have to do worship? You know, God already knows what God is. And so I think these are good questions. I'm glad I was skeptical myself as a child. So the real heart of all this wisdom, whether you're talking of classical Vedanta or Kashmir Shaivism, is that the Atma, you have the whole manifested reality, the physical cosmos, of which we are a part, and we don't deny our physical self, and we should participate in all fullness with what physical life is all about, right? But in addition to that is the Atma, is consciousness. It's also the frontier of modern science. What is consciousness, right? Quantum mechanics can't explain it. Chemistry, biology can't explain it. So this is what it is in one line. It's the physical self, the embodied self, plus consciousness. Now, when you say non-duality, what you really mean is that if you were to look at it from one perspective, all this physical universe would mean nothing if there were no minds, if there was no consciousness to comprehend it, right? All this universe is there because we see it in our mind's eye. We see it in our consciousness. So it all comes together in our consciousness. That is non-duality. There is an embodied duality. We do accept it, but it's all hangs together. In fact, just a few hours ago, there was this very interesting interview I had with this leading journalist in Delhi, and he was asking me about, hey, what's going on in the West, in America, all this wokeism, all this confusion about gender and so on. That's because in the West, and this is a counterpoint to what we were saying earlier, in the West, ever since, for the last 40, 50 years, there's been this attempt to see everything as one body. You know, okay, why is this division between males and females? There should be only one thing. If males do something, females should also be doing the same thing. And therefore, if females can have babies, so can males be. Therefore, let's change language. Rather than saying mothers who are, you know, giving milk to their babies, let's say we're going to call it There is a actual terms that have been adopted by the profession, both in UK and USA, that it should be, gender should not be specified because there's confusion. Confusion because being body-centric, Western civilization is body-centric. There's nothing but bodies, right? So if they're only bodies, there should be one way of looking at all bodies. While the yogic way, or the Indian way, or the Kashmiri way is that there is one which you perceive in your consciousness, but then it's embodied, and from there arise the two. From one arise two, which complement each other. You cannot reduce one to the other. And these two are in our human lives, they are the male and the female, the god and the goddess, right? All the activity is nature, which is the goddess, and Purush consciousness is where all this is, made or kept record of. So it's this attempt to seek a false and rather simple-minded unity in the West, which has led to the horrendous confusion that the West faces right now. And I personally see, as somebody who's done, well, certainly I've done a lot of research at neural networks, but I've also done neuroscience, and I know the yogic and the tantric stuff. Really, the Indian stuff makes sense. It all hangs together. It's consistent with science, and I think science will increasingly adopt it because that's the only way you can go ahead in making sense of this world.
Great,
Well,
thanks.
so Namaskar. Can you hear me?
Namaskar. Yeah, namaskar. Namaskar, how are you?
Fine, fine. Great to hear you. So I'm not knowledgeable, but is consciousness energy
No.
or is energy consciousness?
Consciousness is not a thing. It's not energy. It is transcendent. It's para. The image of we have the image of the smartphone. Okay, all the smartphones have access to this information, and that information is carried by energy, electromagnetic energy. But electromagnetic energy is also a thing. It's a part of the physical universe. While consciousness is transcendent, it's not a thing. It's not a wave. It's not energy. It's everywhere. Consciousness is present everywhere. It's present. There's this beautiful conversation in Brihad Aranyak Upanishad between Gargi and Yagyavalkya. Yagyavalkya is the rishi and Gargi is the student. And Gargi says, are these tattvas separate? You have these tattvas such as earth, water, which is Prithvi, Jal, Agni or Tejas, and then Vayu, and then finally Akash, right? Are they separate? Is one or the other? And Yagyavalkya says, no, they are all entangled. They are all one in the other. Everything is entangled. Consciousness and the body is entangled. So the real way, and this is a very difficult step, because within each one of us is Shiva, is consciousness. Consciousness, male, female, animal, right? That light is the same. But it's difficult for us since our mind experiences all of things, of materiality. It's difficult for us to conceive of this light as something outside of this materiality. But the very heart of the Vedas, the very heart of Kashmir Shaivism is that Shiva is non-material. It's the axis of the universe. It's a non-material para-axis, which we symbolically then represent in the Shivling, for example. And then we say, okay, he's in the Mount Kailash, right? But the hardest thing to comprehend, to go across before that self-transformation can take place is to see this light as something outside of the body. Now, of course, for those who want, I'm sure, many of you guys, at least I meet at least one of you often on the Kashmir Kitab book club, and many of you are in your own personal journeys into yoga of one kind or the other, uh, the sanskars that we have absorbed from our families, uh, they, oh, I'm sorry, I just lost the thread of my argument. Yeah, this, in our personal journey, yeah, I think I got it back. We all, what is life all about? It's success, one way or the other. Success and happiness. Those are two things. And success means to go out. It's like you go to a beautiful place and there's a lake there. You hike, go up to that lake, and you come back. And that whole journey, the journey is the goal. The whole journey fills you up with pleasure and with happiness, right? Or an image that I've used quite often is that if there's a bird, and if that bird never gets an opportunity to fly, if it's a caged bird, that bird will be very unhappy. So the purpose of the life of each one of us is to find that freedom. And that freedom metaphorically could be called like flying. Or metaphorically, that freedom is to become one with that para, because that para is not this physical akash. And once you see that, because it's all within each one of us, once you are able to, through that chink in the heart of your mind, if you're able to enter that space, and then suddenly everything opens up. And this is what good old Patanjali, if he was a Kashmiri, let's say he was, says you get vibhutis. The third pada of the Yoga Sutra is called the Vibhuti Pad, where you get all the access to extraordinary wisdom. And I can tell you, indeed, that does happen, because let me tell you, indeed, the goddess or the universe speaks to you, to each one of us every day. We just don't listen. And it speaks to us and says, do this or do that. And if we were only awake to that language, we would be doing yoga in a most natural way in our lives.
So if we go to Laleshwari, Laldet, sorry, can I speak or?
Sure, yeah. Well, how about taking a minute?
So,
Hard
I'm
stop.
not knowledgeable, but if I understood what Laldet says, Goran Vannam Akoy Watsun Nebra Dupnam Under Asun Suigo Lalitai Wacht Wasun Tawai Hut Lalit Nangai Nasun. Is that means it that Kashmiri Shaivism is non-dualistic? That
Of
everything
course.
is
Kashmir Shaivism, in my view, is perfectly consistent with Vedanta. In Vedanta, if you go to the Upanishads, it says, I am Atma Brahma, or Aham Brahmasmi. I am Brahman. And in Kashmir Shaivism, you say, Chaitanyam Atma. This Chaitanya, this awareness itself is Atma. It's the same thing. But the greatness of Kashmir Shaivism, and I'm a great believer in what it did, amazing stuff, is to put it as simply as possible. Rather than saying that here it's hidden somewhere and you don't know where it is, it put it as starkly as is possible. It said, hey, you don't have to look for that Atma. Your awareness itself is your Atma.
Thank
Be
you for
yourself.
Teji. Thank you. All right, Vikram.
Okay, I think we're
okay. Time up.
1 minute left. So I just need to check with Anjana. Is this hard stop, or can we maybe stop recording?
Subhashi, if you have a little bit more time, because I think there are 3 more questions, we can cover them if
Sure.
that's okay with you. Yeah,
absolutely. And I'll be.
We can extend it. Vikram, we can.
Sounds good.
Okay.
And we have some newcomers who just joined, Anjana. We have Bhushan Soporiji who's joining too from Colorado.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, that's great. So we can continue. I think let's continue.
So I'm gonna, since I have the moderator, I get to pick the questions in whatever order I think feel are interesting. So I'm gonna pick one from I think Sushma. Why is Shiv and Shakti so significant in Kashmir? Why was it so dominant over Vaishnavism seen in southern India? How does one explain it to Gen X and Gen Z children?
Okay, firstly, who's Shiva? or who's Vishnu? We must know. We haven't done this. I feel very bad that we as parents are failing our children. We should be absolutely clear. Who's Shiva, who's Vishnu, who's the goddess, etc. Are they separate? Are we only worshipping Shiva? And that means that we are not worshipping Vishnu and so on. See, the word Vishnu comes from Vish, which means pervader. What pervades the whole reality is Vishnu. And then symbolically, you show him, sleeping on the Sheshanag between evolutions, or the moral law which upholds the universe is Vishnu. That's where Krishna comes in. Shiva is consciousness itself. Even the Bhagavad Gita, I think 15.15 says, Krishna says, I am within each person as Maheshwara. Maheshwar means Shiva, Maha Ishwar, right? So Shiva is consciousness itself. Who we are, if we close our eyes, is our consciousness. Of course, we are our memories, our autobiographical self, etc., which we don't deny. But as we also know that those things also keep on fading, and sometimes you fight your own memories. You say those are bad experiences. Really, who am I is the witness within me, the awareness. The core awareness within me is the real I. And that's what Shiva is. So what Kashmiris did amazingly was to go to the very heart of the question of existence. And the question of existence is about where does this awareness coming from? Now, if you said awareness is just light, but after all, this light informs us, and it informs us real being. And that being is Prakriti, that is the goddess. All of this cosmos is the goddess. Embodiments are the goddess, because it's through embodiments that new embodiments emerge, right? So Shakti in Shiva is this play of consciousness and materiality, which takes place in our minds itself, because the contents of the minds are illuminated by this Prakash, which is Shiva. But so there is this marriage taking place, if you will, this union, yoking taking place within us. If you're truly mindfulness to the extent where you can go to the very heart of where Shiva and Shakti meet, where this light meets our mind. That's what Shiva and Shakti is. So we Kashmiris don't deny Vishnu, because that's another way of doing it. You can either go into the very heart of your being, and that's a very tough way of doing it. That's the path of the warrior. An easier way possibly is through bhakti. You say, well, I want to go to the very heart of what love is. That is devotion. I want to be devoted to this or that. And that's another way. And that's beautiful too. So you might want to worship Krishna or be devoted to an ideal like that of Ram, right? My father, for example, on his, I already told you my father's story, on his left arm were inscribed R.O. And I asked him, hey, what does R.O stand for? He says, my father's name was Ramnath. So he says it stands for Rama's own, because he had dedicated himself to the ideals of the life of Rama, that I'm going to be, as perfect a person as I can be. So these are all ideals, and there are also ways to self-discovery. You can either do it this way or that way. Devotion or the path of the warrior, the Shaivite path, the Tantric path is a very tough path. It's the path of the warrior, because you're going within, you're opening yourself up, and it can lead to a lot of suffering and pain as well. So the Kashmiris embraced this tough path, and it's just, but one doesn't have to. In Kashmir, we worshipped the birth of Krishna, Zaram Satam, because we do it one day instead of Janmashtami, we do it on the Saptami, Satam, Zaram Satam, right? One day earlier. So we did that as well as anybody else. So there is really no dichotomy. That dichotomy between Vaishnavism and Shaivism is a false one, fostered by academics who don't really get it fully. They have some superficial knowledge, but they don't really get it.
Dr. That kind of leads back to, I think, the other question Manoji had, and I think I wanted to kind of I was also curious about that on my own. So I think the devotional form, I think you mentioned that I believe corresponds to bhakti, which is kind of another step in the evolution of yoga, right? So it makes you wonder why that didn't go back to Kashmir. Why
Kashmiris also did bhakti. There are two sides to it. And I think to put everything in perspective, if you read Raj Tarangani, there's no mention of any of the Kashmiri Shaivite masters.
Yes.
That's not what Shaivism. The path of the warrior is the path of the few. It's like Zen. It's the path of the few. For everybody, even in Kashmir, it's always bhakti. Bhakti is the goddess. You go to Pir Bhavani or wherever else, what people are doing are expressing devotion to the goddess, saying, please have daya on me, right? Embrace me or lift me up. So it's the same ultimately for everybody, and that's the way it is, and that's the way it's got to be. It's the path of the bhakti. You do it, you don't touch your own being, you do it through your emotions, sort of lift yourself up, make an imaginary rope, so to speak, of emotion. And your objective is to go to the top of this tower, and there's a window, and you throw this rope up and then lift yourself up, and you enter that top space, right? I just created a poetic image. But the path of the warrior is a extremely tough one. I think we need to put it in perspective, and to expect everybody to do tantra without proper guidance, etc., is probably, people are going to say, hey, what does it really mean? I don't get it. I don't know. I've done my Kundalini and I didn't get anything. And I can understand. So there it is. Bhakti. I'm also for Bhakti. Yeah. Bhakti or Karma Yoga, action, do whatever, ethical life, whatever. Art. Another yoga is the yoga of art. And, Kashmiris are great at art. And in my book, I do have mention of this. One of the greatest painters of the past 500-600 years was a Kashmiri named Nain Sukh. How many of you have heard of Nain Sukh? One of the greatest painters. This was a Raina family, which after the coming of the Muslims left Kashmir, went to Jammu. From there, they went to Kangra. And this Nain Sukh Raina is recognized all over the world. His paintings are amazing. I've reproduced a couple of them in my book, but you can Google him. And so art is another way. One reason why South Indians have done so much better than Kashmiris, and I'll own up to it in modern times, is because they're still connected to their arts. Ultimately, the greatest yoga is the arts. Kashmiri, South Indian women into music, into dance, into everything else. All of that was in Kashmir as well. After Kashmir became Islamic, we were compelled to leave the arts. Now, the Raina family left. But in our families also, dance, Nritya was, the greatest books on theater, on dance were written in Kashmir. But now Kashmiri women don't do that, because somehow to protect ourselves, we knew that certain things would be frowned upon. So we said, okay, we're not going to do it. So that's also yoga. I brought this up just to make the point that arts is one way of going ahead in self-discovery.
Did any of that survive in the sense of kind of being taken inside rather than being, public?
The art survived in certain paintings. In Ladakh, there's a monastery in between Kargil and Leh called Alchi, where these paintings by Kashmiri masters, from the style, you can see that these were Kashmiri painters. And then certainly the Kashmiris who left and created the great Kangra school and the Basoli school. These are all Kashmiri painters. We don't know it. And I say this, that we need to embrace those aspects of Kashmiri culture as well.
Okay, sounds great. So I think I've got another 5 minutes or so. I'm going to go with, I think Manoji had a question. I'm not sure if we addressed.
Sharad has a couple of questions. Can you go up on the top?
I think I missed that. Sorry. Let's see. So there's three questions. I'm going to pick one. What do you feel is the origin of the Vedas and the yoga? Where does this begin for a beginner? I think this is a great question because it kind of, it's kind of a next step for where do we take it from here? I think we've heard a lot from you, but
yeah, what is the origin of the Vedas? Veda, of course, means knowledge. We don't know how far it is, and there are scholars who have looked at it for a long time. How ancient is the Rig Veda? Is it 2000 BC or 3000 BC or even earlier? Now, there are, of course, Indian traditions which talk of much longer dates, which don't seem credible at all. So we can't solve that question. But we do know that the Vedic hymns, first of all, you can use astronomy, which I wrote a book on it many years ago called The Astronomical Code of the Rig Veda, where I've looked at the astronomical questions from so many different perspectives. So it gives you a certain idea that certainly the Vedic rishis were aware of events that were taking place in the skies in the 4th millennium BCE, which is 6,000 years ago and 5,000 years ago. So to give a short answer, much older than cultures elsewhere. Yeah.
And where does this begin for a beginner? I'm assuming that's what it means.
Where does it
begin? Like if we are to, like, based on today's conversation, if we're to kind of take it further and kind of, you know, based.
Okay. I'm not trying to plug my books, but that's the question you're forcing me to say it. I wrote a book last year, perhaps to anticipating questions such as this. It's called The Idea of India, Bharat as a Civilization, which has been quite a bestseller back in India and elsewhere. And it also translates some of the Vedic hymns. It has chapters on yoga and all that stuff, on linguistics, on how all these ideas went outside of India. There's a lot of stuff on Kashmir as well. And the sciences, the hard sciences. You can see that book and another book which came out a couple of months ago called Eternal Bharat, which also has some translations from the Upanishads, plus some more stuff on yoga and art. It has stuff on art and music as well. And then, of course, the other book, which is probably going to be coming out next week, called Whispers from the Past, Art and Wisdom of Kashmir, where again, where I specifically speak about Kashmiri painters and Kashmiri art, and the whole style associated with that. I think really Kashmiris need to do more of that. And I'm all for Kashmir Shaivism and philosophy, but you have to put it in the right perspective, that plus a lot of other stuff, the arts, music, etc., where I think Kashmiris have been a bit wanting, haven't done as well as a package as South Indians have done. And with that package, they have found that power, the goddess has spoken through them, and they're sitting there, rule the world right now. More power to them. I'm very happy.
Absolutely. Okay. Got one minute left. So I'm going to go back to Manoj's questions to talk about, would it be great if Dr. Kak could shed some light on the give and take that has happened between Kashmiris Hindus and the larger Hindu society outside the valley over the centuries? What has changed as a result and what has remained constant? I think you've addressed some of it.
Yeah, Kashmir was a part of, it was all one thing. And we didn't mention, poets like Bilhan or the great manual of music by Sharan Dev. He was a Kashmiri. He left Kashmir, and that's the great, you have Natya Shastra, then you have then you have another book from 500. Then you have this great book, which is the source both of North Indian Hindustani music and Carnatic music. So Kashmir has always been a part of it. People were going back and forth from Kashmir to all over India and from outside India to Kashmir. Abhinav Gupta, the great Kashmiri philosopher, his ancestors were from Kannauj. In fact, his ancestor, Atri Gupta, I think was his name, was brought to Kashmir by Lalitaditya, because Lalitaditya, as we know, ruled over big parts of North India. So he came in. So people were going back and forth. So we're not different. In other words, I assure you guys that we're not different from you guys. We're all the same people.
Great. We have one question, time for one more question. This is a very specific question, so hopefully this is going to be quick. Sharad asked, if we talk about 7 chakras, 5 are worldly and 2 spiritual, yoga is one way to start to build that connection. Is that for the first 5, or does it contribute towards the last 2, and how?
There's no first and last. It's all both. Speaking of Yagyavalkya's answer to Gargi, all these chakras are interconnected ultimately. You focus on Kundalini, you focus on Swadhisthana, go further up, but they're all interconnected. Heart and mind are interconnected. You are, it's like reflection across 2 spaces. You see one in the other. But of course, for preparation as a student, you have to go do it in a kind of systematic way where you say, okay, these are related to life and then these are spiritual. But actually, the spirit and the body interpenetrate each other. It's all interconnected.
Okay.
Entangled.
Yeah. Awesome. I think we had a couple more questions, but I'm not sure if we can go beyond. Maybe we can take that offline. I think Shruti had a question, but maybe we can.
Okay, Shruti's question I cannot deny. Let's just ask Shruti's question. Yeah.
I was surprised to learn a few months ago that the Hinze singing Kashmiri women do is the only surviving practice of singing in the style meter of the Samved.
Yes, there is that famous essay on this in ikashmir.net by Prithvinath Pushp, right? Where he says that, and I think that's wonderful. That's wonderful. But some way singing, you can get copies of that. It was sung in a very particular way on the internet. If you do Google it on YouTube, you'll be able to do some of that. Yeah, I think personally, I find Hinze beautiful, and we should not lose it. We should not lose it, and see how we can add to it.
Okay. One last thing. I think Vikas and Monita had a question, perhaps, that is still online.
Yeah.
I had a question there.
Yeah. I just wanted to say, regarding the, what you said about South Indians keeping their, I teach it. Sometimes we do education for children, and I used one of your articles about, we had this thing where we teach the first time achievements of each of the Vedangas. So, these middle schoolers were taught, I gave them reference to your article about the Vedanga Jyotish, so the kids actually really enjoyed that. I also wanted to tell you one thing. Also, Kashmir Kashmir was about like a much larger entity. Even the relationship between Kashmir and the other parts of the Himalayas, for example, these medieval Malla kingdoms, which are made of southern Kashmir, western Tibet, western Nepal, very fascinating. Also, there's the origins of pagoda style of architecture, which is actually from Kashmir, Nepal region. So many things we don't, we still don't understand yet, yet.
Absolutely. My wife tells me at the door that there's a hard stop here as well. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I could go on, and the observations that you made just now, there's some wonderful threads that one could pick up on, but sadly, we can't do it right now, but thank you very much, Anjana.
Thank you very much. We have overextended our time a lot. We really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Subhash.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Wonderful. Namaskar to everybody.
Namaskar.
Namaskar.
Namaskar. Bye-bye.